Hi guys, thanks for clicking on this video. I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to be talking about the biggest mistakes I made when I was dating. I've been married for 3.5 years, so it's been a while since I've even been in the dating realm. But I remember making some pretty big mistakes. This is what I would have told my younger self, and if you're in that stage where you're dating, hopefully these things can help you too. So I was in 2 other relationships before my husband. Each one of those relationships were so different. The first relationship I was in, I was still in high school. I was a senior in high school, which is kind of funny that I waited that long, even though that's not very long. But I remember in like middle school, I wanted so badly to be in a relationship, and it's just, you know, like all those new things, talking to boys, all that kind of stuff. And I remember asking my parents if I could, and they said I couldn't date till I was like 16. And then when I turned 16, I was like, hey, I don't really want to date anymore because now I can, and apparently I don't want to. I didn't get into my first relationship until my senior year of high school. So I was 17 years old and I was a professing Christian. If you have watched my testimony, you will know that I wasn't actually a Christian. I was just saying I was and thought that I was, but I really wasn't. And so I think that that plays a pretty big role in how I handled that first relationship. But before we even get into that relationship, my first biggest mistake was having too many flippant flings. Like, I would talk to boys a lot, just like on, well, I'm old. To this generation, I am getting really old because I used to talk to boys on instant messenger, like AOL Messenger. I can't even remember what it's called. Instant Messenger. It wasn't texting. We didn't have phones. It was either email, because I remember the first boy I was talking to was through email. And then we moved to instant messaging, and ooh, crazy technology. I just remember talking to a lot of different boys, just very flippantly. Like, I didn't think really anything of it. I wasn't guarding my emotions. I was kind of just like letting them run wild and talking to as many boys as I could. So that's one of the things that I think for my emotions back then, that was really damaging, to be constantly talking to boys, because I was finding that that was like an obsession of mine, and that I wasn't finding fulfillment in God because I wasn't a Christian then. I was going to all these other things to fulfill me, and it never really did. But that's one of the things I wish I could have told myself. You don't need to talk to 25 boys at the same time. You just don't. You can be friends with boys, but you don't have to be like that kind of flirty friend. You might fall for someone that's not gonna fall for you, and I did that many times. So that was definitely something I regret. The next thing was just rushing into it, like rushing into a dating relationship. So when I had my first official relationship, there were 2 guys that were interested in me at the same time. And I thought that that would have made me like feel desirable, but it was miserable. It was actually horrible because they were both really good guys. You know, they were Christians. They went to youth group and church, and I remember wanting to do the right thing, but not knowing what that was, because I did like both of them, and there were different things from different, like one I had more history with, but I also had been hurt by them, and then the other was like newer into my life but had been there for me. And so it was like, why am I in this situation? I wanted to make the decision with clarity, and so the routes that I went were like to just check off boxes, but I didn't feel like my heart was really making a wise decision. One of the main things I did was I asked my family what they thought of both guys. Looking back, it's such a weird conversation. Like, I was sitting at our dining room table asking them who they thought I should date. The problem was, because they were both nice guys, my family was kind of divided on it, and some chose one guy and some chose another. And then I was like, well, great. I wanted you to make the decision for me, and that should have been a sign in and of itself that I wanted other people to make the decision for me. Clearly, I wasn't confident in making that decision, and I should have not made the decision. But I just did, and I rushed into it because I think I just wanted to be in a relationship. I wish I didn't do that. I wish I just said no to both of them, that I wasn't ready, because clearly I wasn't. If there wasn't a clear-cut answer, I wasn't ready. So I wish I could tell myself not to rush. There's no need to rush. Take your time, and if there's not a clear answer, don't make a decision. The next major mistake I made was just not being confident in who I am. Relationships, all the relationships I was in, except for maybe with Nick. I think Nick obviously I'd learned. But in all the relationships, I was still fighting with just insecurities in who I was, especially in the first two relationships. I just wasn't confident in who God made me to be. I wasn't confident in my personality. I wasn't confident in my decisions. That really affected how I acted in the relationships, because when I wasn't confident, the guy dominated the relationship and I just let him. And that happened in like the previous relationships I was in both of them. I was not confident enough to put my foot down. I was not confident enough in just like, hey, I have a mind, I can think, I can make decisions. And I got very easily manipulated and controlled in both those relationships because I wasn't confident. I felt very small, and I made myself small because I didn't speak up about things. I just kind of let them rule and reign, and realized that it's very easy when I just kind of like gave up a lot of things for my heart and my emotions to be manipulated to whatever they thought and felt. In a sense, I don't really blame them, I blame me, because if I would have been confident in myself, I could have stood up for myself, or I could have made decisions, or I could have said, I don't like this, I don't want to do this. So that was a huge mistake. I'm obviously a lot more confident now, but I definitely wasn't back then. One of the themes in all my relationships was I am a fix-it Felix type of person. I have that personality where I just say, I can fix it. And that's literally all I can see is like, if there's a situation that I don't like, I can fix it. If there's a personality trait that I don't like, I can fix it. You know, if the relationship is broken, I can fix it. I just had a fix-it mentality to where if there was something that I didn't like about the person, I was like, no worries, I can fix it. I'll do something else or do something different. It's like they're not too far gone. I was always in the mindset of it can be fixed, which was really, really damaging to me because some things were not meant to be fixed, and I took the responsibility of the fixing when, one, it might not be fixable because God doesn't want to fix it. I also didn't trust that God could fix it. I tried to do it on my own. Not every relationship is good for you. And if it's bad for you, maybe it shouldn't be fixed. Maybe you should just walk away. And I didn't do that. It was always me saying, okay, I don't like this aspect of the relationship. I don't feel good about this, but I can fix it. We can change it. It's not too far gone. But when I'm the only one who views it that way, it's never gonna be fixed. And so I would stay in the relationship, and I would stay in the relationship, and I would stay way too long, which hurt my heart way more, instead of just realizing it's not gonna be fixed and you're not responsible for fixing somebody else, and you need to walk away. Like, for my own sanity, for my own heart and my emotions, I needed to be better at just walking away. I never did that in any of my relationships, and that really damaged me because there were definitely things that weren't fixable, and I stayed thinking that they could be. And then the final thing is not acting on my convictions. In every single relationship, there were things that I felt convicted about, and I never did anything about them, to the point of just completely destroying me mentally and emotionally. And it was very, very difficult. I truly did feel like God was convicting me in every relationship I've had. He convicted me at some point of something, and I didn't do anything about it, especially in my first relationship. Like, I wasn't a Christian back then, and so I didn't have that like Holy Spirit conviction, but there were still things that were red flags, and I stayed and I stayed and I stayed and I stayed and I stayed. That made it so much harder for me when we broke up, because I had just like given in. I should have said no, and I should have walked away. When I saw those red flags, I shouldn't have lied and said like, you know, yes, I want to be with you, or, you know, sometimes I would even lie and say I love you, you know. It didn't mean that I didn't like them, but I would lie and say these things because I felt like it was expected of me. If someone said they love me, I'm supposed to say I love them back. If someone says they want to marry me, I have to say I want to marry them back. Even if I knew I didn't want to, like, I didn't want to. Then I keep compromising because I didn't listen to my convictions at the beginning, and then I just start lying about it. And then it starts to convince my mind, oh, maybe you do love them. Maybe you do want to marry them. It's like, no, I never did. So not listening to my convictions was really, really damaging to me, because God was there in the relationship when things would go bad, and He wanted to help me out of it, and I stayed and I didn't listen. There was this like fear, especially when you're in a relationship and you do like the person, maybe even love the person, and there are things that are starting to happen that you're feeling convicted about, and you don't act on those things. There's this fear that you're gonna lose them, which maybe you are. Maybe God doesn't want you to be with that person. It's very possible. But there's also a point that maybe God's just wanting you to be obedient. For example, like Nick and I, there were multiple moments where we could have broken up, and I still hold to the fact that like I would have been obeying God if I broke up with him, but I stayed in the relationship because there were things that were not healthy and good for us in the relationship. I knew that. I felt strongly convicted. And I didn't act on those convictions, which made it harder as it went on to do anything about it. Even though I knew that leaving would have been obeying, God is still so gracious in the fact that I stayed, and I was miserable through some seasons. We were both pretty miserable because we were dealing with a lot in the relationship. But He also gave an option of fixing it and putting our foot down and making changes way into the relationship, making drastic changes for our like spiritual health, our mental health. Like, we had to either make those changes or break up, and we made the changes. God saw us through. So I'm really thankful for that, but there was things so far before that, like really ultimatum point, where I could have just been obedient and stepped away. And that doesn't mean that Nick and I wouldn't have ended up together, but there were things in the relationship that I was compromising in, and I felt convicted that I shouldn't be in it. And even then, I stayed. God can work through wrong choices. And this sounds so bad. Like, I love my husband. God absolutely worked miracles in our relationship, but He could have still worked that through us breaking up, through me being obedient and breaking it off. And He could have called us back together. That's very, very possible. I've seen it happen. But I stayed, and God still met me in that decision as well. So act on your convictions. It's gonna save you a lot of hurt, because I went through a lot of hurt in all my relationships by not acting on my convictions. Ultimately, I don't think that those relationships would have been so emotionally destroying had I acted on my convictions, and had I listened to God and what He wanted for me, and seen that this relationship is not healthy for me, and been confident enough in who I was to make the decision to walk away for my own health and spiritual health as well. There was a lot of mistakes I made. I'm sure there's tons more, like smaller ones. I think those were just like the big overarching mistakes that affected me the most. But God is good, and even in your mistakes in dating, He is there. He never expects perfection in the dating realm. Like, it's just not gonna happen. You have two sinful people coming together to try and like work with each other and learn each other. It's not gonna be perfect. No relationship is gonna be perfect. As long as you're learning and you're growing, you're listening to God, you're listening to your convictions, you're being confident in who you are, you're taking it seriously, it's gonna work out, even if there are mistakes along the way. So hopefully this encourages you guys. It's been a long time since I dated, and I remember not enjoying it at all. So to those of you that are dating, my heart goes out to you. It's not always a fun, it is a fun time, and at the same time, not always a fun time, because so much can happen just emotionally, and it can be really draining. So I'm praying for you. Hopefully you guys can glean some wisdom off of all of my horrible mistakes. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.